Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to this, our first CGHE webinar of 2026. We have a great lineup planned for the few next months ahead, but this is a real important topic for us to start. I'm David Mills, and I'm the Director of Centre for Global Higher Education, and I'm welcoming Yulia Zayashuk to give this talk today. Yulia is a visiting researcher in our department and an associate professor at the Franko University in Lviv, and his PhD in education has been working for a while on internationalization, mobility, and resilience universities in Ukraine, given what's been happening and the seriousness of this war going on and on. So you are got lots of different qualifications. You've been visiting scholar in lots of places. But today you're going to be talking about academic mobility as a strategic instrument of resilience, reimagining Ukraine's internationalization. So the seminar room, and we're all in the education department here, and also welcome to you all online, wherever you're coming from. Screen and the seminar room is yours. Yulia, please.
Thank you, David. So this presentation explores academic mobility as a strategic instrument of resilience during Russia's full-scale military invasion of Ukraine. I use the concept of resilience here in the critical sense, not to romanticize endurance, but to examine what students and institutions are forced to do, and to do under these extreme conditions and at what cost. In this sense, resilience is not a virtue, but a condition imposed by war. To understand why academic mobility taken on this role, I would like to start not with the university, but with the historical structure. So before 2022, international student mobility was largely framed as an opportunity-driven process. It means that it was associated with personal development, academic advancement, and rebuilding and individual choice. However, after 24th February 2022, the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, this logic changed dramatically for Ukrainian students. And international mobility is no longer primarily about opportunity. It has become a form of academic protection and crisis response. For many Ukrainian students today, studying abroad means preserving access to education under conditions of war, maintaining disrupted academic trajectories, finding temporary academic safety rather than permanent relocation, and negotiating a deep sense of responsibility toward Ukraine. This is not a story of educational tourism. This is a story of students navigating education while living with war, emotionally, cognitively, and ethically. So my work aims to establish how the nature of international academic mobility changed after 24th of February 2022. And based on my previous and ongoing research, I show two key shifts. First one, student mobility from Ukrainian university has increased sharply since 2022, like 5-fold increase. And second one, and the most important, mobility has changed qualitatively. So many students no longer see themselves as just studying abroad, but as representatives of Ukraine with a social and civic mission, informing international community about the war, advocating for Ukraine, organizing cultural and fundraising events, and contributing to future recovery. I observed the same patterns in the interviews with Ukrainian graduate students here at the University of Glasgow, where students explicitly described their mobility as a way to gain knowledge and networks in order to bring them back to Ukraine and contribute to its post-war recovery. So these transformations raise fundamental questions about the role of university, such and internationalization and student mobility in times of war, question that this presentation addressed through an in-depth qualitative case study of the University of Glasgow. This presentation is based on my recent empirical work conducted at the University of Glasgow, which is very recent, conducted at the University of Glasgow in November and December 2025. The field work was supported by the small grant of the Department of Education and involved in-depth interviews with Ukrainian students participating in international wartime academic mobility at the University of Glasgow. I'm very grateful for this support. These findings have not yet been published or presented elsewhere. So this is my first time with this data, and I'm currently in the process of analyzing all this material. And today I would like to share with you my initial analytical insights and to discuss them together later. This Glasgow case study formed part of my broader research project on the Ukrainian academic mobility and internationalization in times of war, supported by the British Academy and based here at the department. But today's presentation I focus specifically on Glasgow case as a qualitative case study. So what exactly do I study here? I look at how Ukrainian students experience international academic mobility during wartime. It is not a policies or statistics or mobility numbers alone, but students' life experience. The research asks what has changed in student mobility after the invasion, how mobility functions under conditions of war, what benefits and risks it creates for Ukraine, and finally, this experience tells us about the future of internationalization and higher education policy in context. Before turning to students' interviews, it is important to briefly outline the institutional context in which this experience takes place. So the Twins for Hope initiative was launched at the UK-wide response to full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Its aim was to create temporary academic protection by matching Ukrainian universities with UK partners. The University of Glasgow joined this initiative voluntarily and asked it to be twinned specifically with the Kyiv Mohyla Academy in Kyiv, drawing on long-standing academic ties. The program offers fully funded temporary credit mobility, typically for one term or one academic year. Importantly, students are not separated into special track. They study within existing programs as ordinary students. A key principle of the initiative is that it is not about relocation or resettlement. Instead, it is conceived as a form of temporary academic protection. It is about preserving education during wartime while maintaining students' connection to Ukraine and encouraging return. Finally, this initiative is embedded in Glasgow's broader institutional commitments to internationalization and support for forced migrants at the University of Sanctuary. This status provides institutional capacity for initiatives supporting conflict-affected students. Against this institutional backdrop, now I will turn to methodology and the student voices that form the core of this presentation. So methodologically, it is a qualitative interview-based study. The approach enables a deep, analytically rich understanding of academic mobility as lived and negotiated in the wartime context. I conducted 13 in-depth interviews with Ukrainian students at the University of Glasgow. The core group consists short-term exchange students from Kyiv Mohyla Academy, participated in the Twins for Hope initiative, and complemented by degree seeker students, including those with refugee status. Fields of study include humanities and social sciences, law, and STEM disciplines. Interviews were carried out in person in Glasgow. Each interview lasted about 1 hour. The analysis follows a thematic approach, comparing case and paying attention not only to recurring patterns, but also to tensions, contradictions, and silence. The sample includes participants with traumatic war-related experience, students carrying a double burden of academic demands and ongoing emotional stress, and individuals often lacking long-term stability. So this study is informed by both first-hand engagement with Ukrainian students participating in this academic mobility during the war, institutional perspectives. It is about interviews with staff involved in these principal initiatives, and with researchers' own engagement with the field of Ukrainian academic mobility during the war. I combine this work with my broader comparative project, as I already mentioned. While this presentation focused on the University of Glasgow as a case study, the research formed part of the wider comparative project, including parallel data collection at the University of Glasgow. Analytically, the material is organized into 5 thematic blocks, which structure the rest of the presentation. So we will have motivation, challenges, institutional response, mission of Ukrainian students abroad, and looking ahead. I begin with analysis. Begin the analysis with motivation and emotional positioning, because this is where the war enters students' narratives more clearly. Across interviews, one finding is remarkably consistent. Students describe mobility as a decision made inside the war, not alongside it. The war is not background noise. It is a starting condition of mobility. So for these students, mobility emerged as a war survival strategy. So not a career, it is important to mention, it is not a career optimization. So the war appears as a directly lived condition, shaping motivation, emotions, and priorities. The decision to study abroad was often described as unplanned, forced, and accelerated by the invasion, rather than a long-term career strategy. Even exchange students repeatedly emphasized that without the war, they would likely have remained in Ukraine. Motivations is framed less as advancement and more as preservation. So when normal academic routine in Ukraine were disrupted by air raids, by blackouts and institutional instability, not losing education, not losing time, keeping the future horizons open, rather than excelling competitively. Studying abroad becomes a way to ensure that education does not collapse under the wartime condition. So that is important to mention. Importantly, mobility is also described as a form of temporary psychological shock, a way to regain cognitive and emotional capacity after prolonged stress. So the opportunity to study in the UK was described as a chance to breathe, step out of constant pressure, or regain the ability to think after prolonged exposure to war-related issues. This does not contradict patriotism, rather it enables continued engagement with Ukraine. So on the contrary, many students articulate a strong sense of responsibility. That is important to mention. Studying abroad is preparation to contribute later. The idea is taking knowledge back. The idea is bringing methods home. The idea is working for Ukraine later. So it appears repeatedly across disciplines. Emotionally, students inhabit a deeply ambivalent position, grateful for safety, yet abandoned by guilt and moral tension. So safe, yet unsettled. Taken together, this shows that wartime student mobility is best understood, not a career optimization, but survival strategy embedded in responsibility towards Ukraine. Let's go to our block 2. After understanding why students left Ukraine and with what emotional baggage, the next step is to see what happens when these motivations encounter the reality of the UK university. A key finding is that mobility does not eliminate difficulty, it reconfigures it. Students consistently reject the idea that studying in the UK during wartime is easy. What changes is not the absence of difficulty, but its form. Instead of physical insecurity, students face cognitive overload, emotional strain, and institutional adaptation. Many describe studying while mentally elsewhere, so they are mentally in Ukraine, while physically in the UK. Students describe nights without sleep due to air raids, alert back home, constant monitoring of use, and anxiety for family or friends, all while being expected to perform academically in a stable environment. So this creates a paradoxical situation. They are physically safe, but emotionally and temporarily anchored to the war. Several students explicitly name war-related trauma as their main challenge rather than language or coursework. Trauma manifested not only as stress, but as difficulty concentrating, emotional numbness, guilt for being safe. That is very important for all of the students, guilt for being safe, and hesitation to fully enter students' life. Trauma emerges as an invisible barrier. It shapes learning, concentration, and participation, but remains largely unseen for institutions. A unique wartime challenge is the Russian factor. Even without open conflict, shared classroom produce emotional tension that students must constantly negotiate. This was not framed as an institutional failure, but as deeply personal and political challenge shaped by war experience. And finally, students distinguish clearly between being welcomed and actually belonging. Inclusion exists structurally, but belonging often does not. This was especially true for short-term students, exchange students, who described themselves as passing through rather than becoming part of the cohort. Wartime mobility often produces partial integration. Instead, wartime mobility forces a comparative and critical perspective, recognizing both strengths and limits in the frame of UK and Ukrainian higher education. So students do not idealize UK higher education in the frame of this. Important to mention here, students emphasize that the university in the UK does not lead students by the hand, but expect them to take responsibility for their own learning. Learning is central not on reproduction material, but on independent thinking, interpretation, and argumentation. Students experience, let's say, shift from external guided learning to autonomy-based academic responsibility. So they feel that it is like this in the UK. Students highlighted greater emphasis on independence and self-directed learning. increased personal responsibility and a shift from attendance-based to agency-based education. At the same time, students contrasted the structural efficiency in the UK universities with relation care often present in the Ukrainian institutions. So some students mentioned that lecturers in Glasgow were seen less as controllers of the learning process and more as facilitators, subject experts, and partners in intellectual engagement. But some students observed that at the same time they are less involved in students' personal circumstances than it's often the case in Ukraine. Taken together, this shows that international mobility during wartime produces a dual burden: academic adaptation and emotional survival. After exploring the challenges students faced, the next step is to examine the role of the institution. What did the university actually do, and how was this support experienced? Taken together, students consistently emphasized that the University of Glasgow provided substantial financial, academic, and administrative support, enabling educational continuity during wartime. Psychological support was visible and formally available. However, many students did not actively use it. War-related trauma often remain too normalized and too complex to be easily communicated with the standard counseling frameworks. When asked about what specific needs, students recognized goodwill and solidarity, but also pointed to the absence of targeted spaces or structured design explicitly for war-affected students. It was also about, actually, a pattern across interview was that individual staff members, lecturers, advisors often showed empathy, flexibility, and understanding, but this care was experienced as personal rather than systematic. After examining institutional response, the next question is, what do students themselves do with this support? This blog demonstrates the institutional response created the conditions of possibility for Ukrainian students agency. What does it mean to be a Ukrainian student abroad during wartime, not only as a recipient of support, but as an active moral, cultural, and political subject? A striking finding is that students do not see themselves as passive beneficiaries or as a passive participants of international mobility. That is important to mention here. Students describe their role abroad not as escape, but as a temporary relocation with meaning. So academic growth was described as a changing how they think, not just what they learn. Personal development occurred through crisis, not outside it. For some, studying abroad functioned as psychological pause, enabling partial recovery from chronic wartime stress without disengaging from Ukraine. Let's say it like this. So students articulated their mission in everyday, non-heroic terms. They spoke about representing Ukraine in classrooms, conversations, and academic spaces, often in small acts. Many students saw their mission as making Ukraine visible, situating Ukraine within European and global context, countering simplifications and backgrounding of the war. This took everyday form, like classroom discussions, informal conversation with peers, and social media engagement in English. Representation is practiced in everyday advocacy, not formal diplomacy. Let's say like this. Many students include those who did not identify as activists, describe their mission as speaking about Ukraine in everyday context. So importantly, this work was rarely described as organized activism. Instead, it took the form of continuous, informal, and often emotionally demanding everyday memory work. Other things, students from humanities and social science explicitly linked their mission to challenging Russia-centric framework in Slavic and post-Soviet studies, and introducing Ukrainian perspective as non-colonial. Let's say, for some students, particularly in the humanities and social studies, academic presence itself was understood as a political and cultural act. So students emphasize that simply being present in Western academic spaces as Ukrainian scholars carried symbolic and epistemic weight in the frame of this. This includes rethinking Slavic studies, challenging Russia-centric frameworks, decolonizing disciplinary canons, and foregrounding Ukrainian perspectives in literature, history, and policy. Across field, students emphasized that their mobility was not oriented toward permanent departure, but toward accumulation of knowledges, skills, and experience to be reinvested later. This was articulated as returning to Ukraine after the experience and with the experience, knowledge, and skills, contributing to education, research, IT, law, culture, and public discourse, maintaining professional ties with Ukrainian institutions even while abroad. At the same time, students identified several modes of societal impact. Information and awareness rising about the war, participating in cultural events, screenings, discussions, and fundraisers, donations, volunteering, and informal networking. Importantly, students often emphasize that impact does not require formal leadership, but can be connected through continuous small-scale actions. Students receive the narrative of the heroic refugee. It is important to mention, and instead articulate grounded relational agency. Let's say like this. Taken together, this shows that wartime mobility produces a hybrid identity: learner, witness, and advocate. And finally, having looked at student agency, the final step is to ask what the experience tells us about universities and internationalization more broadly. Students consistently describe universities as anchors of normality and meanings during the war. Across interviews, all the interviews, students consistently describe universities not a neutral service provider, but a community with ethical, social, and political responsibility. Universities were expected by students to preserve continuity of education despite disruption, provide stability, routine, and structure in conditions of uncertainty, and offer spaces for critical reflections on war, rather than threaten it as external to academic life. So several students emphasize that during a war, universities not just place to study, they may become the only stable institution in students' life. They rejected the idea of forcing development. For them, recovery starts now, through people, knowledge, and institutions. All students view, that is important to mention, all students viewed internationalization as essential for Ukrainian higher education during wartime. Internationalization was described as enabling continuity of study when domestic infrastructure is damaged or unsafe. Access to resources unavailable in Ukraine during the war, like labs, libraries funding. Psychological reassurance that Ukraine is not isolated. That is important for them. Crucially, students framed internationalization not as brain drain, but as circulation of knowledge and people. So they do not see internationalization as loss. They see it as circulation, voice, and co-production. Students propose a shift in how Ukraine approaches internationalization. Rather than focusing only on sending students abroad or adapting to foreign system, they argue for epistemic reciprocity. Ukraine as a contributor, not just a learner. That is important. Creating platforms where Ukrainian scholars and Ukrainian students can speak from their own context, especially about war, post-colonial legacies, and Eastern Europe. Strengthening Ukraine's presence in reshaping fields historically dominated by Russia-centric frameworks, Slavic studies and post-Soviet studies. Internationalization should move from integration to representation and co-production of knowledge. So what is striking is how clearly students articulate priorities. Priorities, safety and quality and care ambition and international partnerships. Listening to students allows us to rethink internationalization not as mobility for excellence only, but as mobility for resilience as well. So, taken together, let's say internationalization is not as mobility for excellence only, but as mobility for resilience. And here it is about key takeaways. What the study shows. Wartime student mobility is not escape, but reconfigured responsibility. Ukrainian students abroad navigate war-related trauma, academic adaptation, and transnational belonging, while actively redefining their role and responsibility toward Ukraine. Physical safe does not automatically produce psychological relief. Formal inclusion does not guarantee belonging. Internationalization is most effective when it enables agency. Students are not passive beneficiaries, but active academic actors. Ukrainian students abroad emerge as participants of global academia who carry knowledge, values, and commitments that expand beyond their host institutions and into Ukraine's future. Understanding wartime mobility through the lens of resilience, lens of agency, and lens of transnational continuity allows the university to move beyond the binary of brain drain versus retention toward a more ethical and realistic model of higher education during and after the war, after our victory. Thank you for your attention and happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Yulia. That was a very moving and really important study you've done, and you got it to really be sort of raw emotional issues and profound paradoxes of guilt and sort of conflict that people are feeling. So thank you. If you want to unshare your screen, then we can see on our screen that our participants who would like to pose questions. Please use the chat function. in the room, we've got some questions, but actually Emma Harden-Wolfson, you're our first question, if you'd like to pose a question. So Emma will ask you to unshare your screen.
She said that you can read them.
Okay, right. So Emma asked a question about she said, thank you, Yulia, for this thoughtful and provoking and nuanced presentation. It presents a fascinating snapshot of what it means to be international student in higher education during a 21st century crisis. I have two questions for you. One is, where are you publishing this work? And second, in your larger study, to what extent do you consider whether the findings could be applicable to other contemporary crises, or is this very specific to Ukraine? Emma's based in McGill.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Emma. So this first question was about publishing.
Yes, yeah.
It was not published for the moment. It is, if you're asking about this presentation that I'm doing today, it is based on my recent research at the University of Glasgow. It was in November and December 2025, so very recently. And actually, I'm presenting this information today for the first time. And actually, I wanted to share this. It is very new. It is my initial analysis of all of this. So it is not published, but hopefully it will be published when we will study this, and we will be talking about this, and I will get information and I will say about this. I have broader research, so I did part of my research here at the University of Glasgow, and this was already published. I have two articles based on that research, and it is published in the Journal of Adult and Continuing Education, and I will be happy if you check and if you read it.
And the second question was about how unique is this situation in Ukraine as compared to other contexts?
That is a good question, actually. Unfortunately, we have many conflict areas in today's world. So we have a lot of examples, and actually, I'm thinking about this to create some kind of comparative education research, to take different case studies from different countries. Actually, I'm thinking of this, and actually, I'm open to such kind of project. So if I will find partner in the frame of such project, I would be happy. Actually, partners representing different educational cases and different countries who unfortunately have existential threats facing this for the moment. Now I'm doing Ukrainian case, and for me, it is unique. For me, it is important to gain other experience from other countries who already have this experience. And from the other side, for me, it is important to share our Ukrainian experience and to talk about this. Unfortunately, we are experienced people, and we can share our experience with other potential threats, and to try to do good.
Okay, we have a question on which area that's the basic.
Forced internationalization is called to Turkey, for example, from Syria and other countries. There's there's not huge literature, but there is some literature from that. So it might be that you could compare your findings without having to do a sort of second empirical study. So that might be worth looking at. But my questions were, I suppose, in relation to kind of how similar or not is this to other types of international student mobility. I was just wondering if you could say something firstly about access to this mobility? Because I guess the literature shows that generally it's students from kind of higher or more advantaged families who tend to take advantage. Do we see that played out in Ukraine, or because of the very particular circumstances, is it more diverse? And secondly, I suppose their classroom experiences, because the literature would suggest that international students generally have quite a hard time integrating socially and academically. But again, I was wondering whether, because there's been a lot of sympathy amongst the UK population towards international students, are those dynamics different from those experienced by other international students within the classroom?
Thank you, Rachel. What you mentioned, yes, actually you are right. When I was writing my article, my previous article about this, so it was one of my tasks to read about other examples. So to read about experience of other countries in the frame of conflict or war, this, and to see what we can use that experience. So your question was about how many students can have access to this mobility.
Not necessarily how many, but how diverse those students are socially.
Now it became much more easily than before the war, let's say. And as I already mentioned, we have Ukrainian student mobility from Ukrainian university has increased sharply from 2022. Before it was like 9% per year, according to my research result and according to open sources via universities web pages and university reports. It was more or less 9% per year. I mean, in average. But now it is like 5 times. So it is much more students have possibility to take part in this. When it was started, there was so many initiatives from different European universities and UK universities and US universities. They opened different programs aimed to support Ukrainian students and Ukrainian researchers as well. So now it is much more easily that this. In the frame of this case, the University of Glasgow, because I'm talking about this today, so it is very successful project. It is very successful initiative partnership between the University of Glasgow and the Academy here. So when it was started, they have 50 Ukrainian students every term. So it is quite something, and so 35, 45, 50 every term. So next term they will have new students. So normally students come for 1 term, for 2 terms. It depends on area. STEM discipline, 2 terms. Anyway, they have a lot of students. University of Oxford, I will give you as an example. University of Oxford did not have such initiative before the war. So when it was started, the University of Oxford created this initiative aimed to support Ukrainian master students. And it was together in coordination with these Oxford colleges. So it was supported, it was fully funded for Ukrainian students. And of course, there was so many applications and it was competitive, but it was possible to get it as well. So what I'm trying to say, so now we have a lot of initiatives for Ukrainian students, and it is much more easy to do today after was rather than for the war. Sometimes it is competitive, sometimes not. So it is absolutely open. What I'm trying to say, it is absolutely open to everyone. If you want to do this, you can do this.
The reason why Rachel's point was that I'm sure there are schemes which are funded, but then perhaps there's also mobility that's unfunded. So people who have funding to come without, whether that's changing mobility patterns as well. Is that right, Rachel?
Well, I was just wondering whether, because I guess one of the arguments that's made is that, kind of lower or less advantaged students sometimes aren't mobile because of cultural capital, or they don't have the confidence to, be in a different situation. I was just wondering whether being in a war zone just actually, there are lots of different social processes going on there. You've got a big incentive to leave that might, I suppose, diversify the social composition of the mobile student population.
It is also important to mention here that it is open, but sometimes students don't want to participate because of war trauma, because of different family circumstances, that I can't leave Ukraine now because of different family circumstances. So they are allowed, they can different options, but they don't want to go, or they can't because of different family circumstances, or because of war trauma, or I can understand this as well. When you're forced to move, you sometimes you don't want to move. So a lot of students whom I ask about this in Glasgow, for example, they would never decide to go to the University of Glasgow without the war. Sometimes they wanted to have some short rest to avoid the sirens and these blackouts, to think about this, to try to tell something with them, new knowledge, new skills, new experience, and to go back. To have this couple of months, then break, the psychological break, separated from stress. But as I mentioned, you can't be separated, and you can't avoid this because all the time you're monitoring the news, and you are physically here in Glasgow, but psychologically you are in Kyiv, in Ukraine.
Good, thank you. Can I ask you to speak a little bit louder, Yulia, because people online are finding this a little bit heavy, but it's fine. No, don't worry. And Ahmed, do you want to ask a question? Can you unmute? You should be able to unmute. That might try that. No, there you go. Can you unmute now?
Hello.
There you go.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, David, and thank you, Yulia, for the great presentation. I just have a question. I think it also resonates with Rachel's point. So there is a kind of emphasis on, the mobility of students as a form of survival and escaping the war. So how did you unpack the experiences of those students through academic mobility rather than displacement?
The question, I guess, is you're framing it as mobility rather than displacement. And is that why did you choose that?
So it is about difference between mobility and displacement.
Well, I mean, is that your question, Ahmed? Are you surprised?
Yeah, because there's a forced element here in the movement of students. So I'm wondering how these experiences differ when we talk about students from the displacement lens, if you like. So you talked about mobility of students that they didn't want actually to pursue their career goals or future aspirations, and this was mentioned in one of the slides. But at the same time, you talk about it as academic mobility, where there is freedom of choice. People can choose where they want to go, and they want to study, and but there is a free choice element when we compare people who were forced to leave their countries because of the war or the conflict, and people who pay from their own funding and they choose the university they want to study at, etc. So I'm wondering, why did you unpack those experiences from an academic mobility lens rather than from displacement? I hope this is more helpful.
That's a good question, because it's sort of about the levels of freedom and agency within the framing.
Students didn't identify themselves as displaced person.
They do identify themselves.
No,
They don't. No.
they don't.
And that's partly because they're coming for a short period in Glasgow.
They're coming for short period, and even those who are with refugees. So it was when was started, many students left Ukraine as refugee students, and after that, they become when they were abroad. At that stage, they were invited to become a part of this university, so it was several initiatives and from my university of Lviv to integrate those students who are already abroad.
Mhm.
So to take that possibility to be part of this international mobility with this university, or that university depends on where they are at the moment. But across all of my interviews, all of the students, even not almost not, but all of the students mentioned that we are not here for all of the rest, for the rest of our life. So we are here to take this time to be separated from this stress, to gain new knowledge and to go back. All of the students, and I can compare this with interviews which I did before the war. So it was not like this. Before the war, it was not like this. So now it is like this. We are here. We want to take this knowledge. We want to take this experience. We want to take this network. So it is also important to create network. So now students, when they are back to Ukraine, they know many people in their area, and they can use this contact for Ukrainian post-war recovery as well. So if you have this network, if they know you and you know people, you can do this as well. And no one tell me if I would like to be here. All of the students tell me that I want to go back, and I want to integrate my new knowledge, and I want to do something that depends on my area. Lawyers.
So can I ask a question here? So at one level, is this a particular finding because of this form of sanctuary that Glasgow is giving, which is these one-term? So these are quite short-term mobility. So in some ways, it's very clear that you're not trying to leave because it's built into a degree program. Now, if you were to compare those with students who maybe decided to come themselves to do a master's in Oxford or some other university, now those students wouldn't necessarily say I'm leaving, because actually there is also a discourse possibly where you probably wouldn't want to admit. Would that be fair? You'd be seen as wrong to say I've had enough.
It is also important to say that they, even when they are abroad, even when they are doing studying abroad, they still connected to Ukraine.
Of course.
And they mention this all the time. That I have connection to Ukraine. I am still monitoring this and that, and so I'm trying to do something while I'm here as well. It is not obligatory for me to go back tomorrow. When for somebody, it depends on the region. Sometimes it is not safe, and it is very unsafe. So I can't go back tomorrow because it is not safe. But I can do something for Ukraine while I'm here. So that is an option. That is also a position that I'm doing. I'm organizing fundraising event. I'm organizing some cultural events, different talks to tell about Ukraine for here. So even if I'm here today, I'm doing something for Ukraine.
I get that, yes. But I guess my question would be, would it be possible for them not to say that? Because of the expectation on them, because the sense of nationhood at risk is so profound for everyone.
Good question.
That's a difficult question to ask.
Probably not. Probably not. I can imagine that maybe some student would not tell me about it, or would not come to the interview. If they want to remain and they don't want to do something for Ukraine, they will not come to my interview. I can imagine that it is like this as well. So those who came they accept and they want to do this. I can imagine that it is like this as well. But again, even those who came to my interview before the war, they didn't tell me something about this. So you're right, it can be such answer as well. And I can imagine that they didn't come to avoid this answer.
Other questions, comments? Yes,
Good
please.
question. So thinking if those students, many of the students wouldn't normally consider going abroad, I imagine they didn't maybe put that much effort to preparing linguistically. At least comparing it with Poland, I know there is a lot of students who don't speak good English, and I'm wondering if only students who spoke very good English decided to come to the UK, or they were encouraged to come and like learn here, or whether they got any support of language.
It is not about, when you're asking me about language, of course, not every Ukrainian student has 100% in English. But for them, I asked them about this as well. For them, it is not linguistic question. It is not that I can speak English in the frame of linguistic. It is also about how I can organize my life here in the UK. It is how can I be separated from Ukrainian trauma? How can I arrange my life in the university, in the UK university? So yes, sometimes they don't have good English. It is it became better when they are in the UK. It is not, let's say, first option when university will choose this student or that student, because this is specific wartime academic mobility. So sometimes even during interviews, some students can do this in English. Sometimes they're not able to explain something in English because of this. So they want to explain me in Ukrainian, and it is also acceptable. So they study not a separate group. They study with other UK students, and Glasgow University, Oxford University, it is in English. So they are able to follow, they are able to take part in these classes, in these discussions. So it is enough. It is not 100% maybe, but it is enough to study, to be included in the group, have communication with their classmates, with their teachers, to read all of this, to write all of this. So it is acceptable. It is acceptable level.
Good. Are there any more questions in the room, either online or Nadia? You have your hand up online, please. Let me see if I can unmute you if you can't. You should be able to speak, Nadia. Not? The landline. Yeah, try that. You can unmute now. It should work. Again, should let you unmute yourself. If not, can you type your question?
Just to add my answer to your question about language. For students, it was also about cognitive overload, and it was about unfamiliar assessment process in the university. So it was more about this than about language itself. Do you know what?
Yeah, I understand.
So they're talking about this. They don't feel that language is a problem. So they have other, let's say, problems. Yeah,
Makes sense.
but not language.
Okay. Nadia is, she's struggling to unmute and hasn't posted a question. So it's quite hard for me to read it out for you, I don't know what your question is. But I'll give you another 30 seconds. If not, I'll just remind everyone that next week we're welcoming Francesca Liski to talk about the first generation students and a comparative study of 3 different countries. So you're all welcome to join that. And I think probably, Nadia, we're going to have to close down now. And unless you through some miracle are able to unmute yourself, here we are. Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, and Nadia says, do you have any data about the percentage of Ukrainian students who return to Ukraine after their studies? And she says, from Oxford, since 2022.
I don't have specific data, but this process already started. It is probably not possible to have now specific data because it is a ongoing process. So I can't tell you that I have specific data because we are in the process of this because it is ongoing.
Okay, well, I hope you can carry on doing this research. It's really important.
It would be great. Actually, I'm thinking of this. I would like to do this. I would like to share this in like a half year, in 2 years. I'm thinking of this, and I would be very happy to share this and to explore this in more details. Actually, this is a very important question, and hopefully I will be able to answer these questions in 1 year, in 2 years.
I think that's important.
I'm thinking of this.
Good. Well, thank you, Nadia, for your question. Thank you all online for joining us. Much appreciated. Thank you for coming today, everyone in the room, and we're going to say goodbye now to you all, but thank you again.